everybody was sitting around the table, and Sharon slaps the table and says, I decided to disengage. What's your assessment? And I'm thinking, I don't know, in the army, we usually assess first and then decide.
Most people do that.
Yeah, right? And the chief of staff says to him, Moshe Bogi Elon, says to the Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, listen, if you pull out of Gaza like that, in 1 year, Gaza will become Hamastan, Al-Qaedastan, and Hezbollastan. Mm-hmm. This is what's going to happen.
Yeah. Hello again, I'm Ambassador Friedman. Welcome back to the One Jewish State podcast. You know, when we talk about one Jewish state, about Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, over its biblical homeland, you know, there are lots of different vectors that apply. We can talk about it from a perspective of human rights, perspective of faith, of economics, of religious freedom. I mean, there's lots of ways to look at it. Of course, one of the most important ways to look at Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria is how it impacts Israel's national security. And I'm happy to have with me today really one of the real, not just an expert, but deep thinkers, and of course, as a brigadier general, one of the real military heroes of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, who's given enormous attention and thought to this. Brigadier General Amir Avivi. Amir, thank you so much for being with me.
Ambassador, it's a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. Let's just start with the sort of the basic question. I'm advocating that Israel should retain Judea and Samaria forever. Can Israel ever be secure if it gives Judea and Samaria to the Palestinians? Let's just put that on the table and answer that question.
Not only Israel is not going to be secure, it's not going to exist.
Nah.
Israel cannot thrive, cannot exist without Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley. And when you look at the map of Israel, at the width of Israel, from the Mediterranean to the Jordan Valley, or as people like to say, from the river to the sea.
I've heard that phrase, yes.
Yes. It's 45 miles. That's it. It's a city. It's not even a state. It's 45 miles. It's really, really small. And, from this 45 miles, you have 9 miles of shore, where Tel Aviv is, and, most of our big cities, 9 miles of Jordan Valley, and the rest is Judea and Samaria. So basically the land of Israel is Judea and Samaria with a bit of margin, shallow area on the sides. And this is why all our history is in those mountains. And I can tell you that if let's say we erase the name Israel, okay? We just take the topographic map, this 45 miles, and we bring it to any officer school around the world. Whether it's Japan, Austria, Australia, US, UK, we show them the map and say to them, defend. In a minute, 100% will say, if we're not on the mountains, we don't exist. That's it.
Right.
And this is why all our history is on the mountains. You cannot exist if you are not on the mountains. And the only natural border for a land that is so small is the Jordan Valley.
During the Obama administration, there was a lot of pressure put on Israel to agree to a Palestinian state. And they even brought in, I remember, General Allen, who came in with a whole team. And they came up with this idea of, electronics and sensors and fancy GPS components and early warning systems, all designed to enable the Israeli Defense Forces to retreat back to that 9 mile border of the Green Line. Fortunately, Israel didn't agree to it. But does that work? Is that a waste of time?
So basically, any discussion anybody ever had about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, at the end of the day, this discussion is around 3 different options. We tried all of them. We know what works and what doesn't. And I like to talk about this option, so we'll get an understanding. So basically, the first option is separation. We hear all the time politicians and people say, we need to separate from the Palestinians. So, okay, where did we do that? We did that in Gaza.
Yeah.
How did it work? Devastating. Disaster.
Yep.
Now think about it. Gaza, really, it's nothing. It's a very small area, shallow, along the sea. This is not the mountains of Judea and Samaria where we defeated empires. It's a very small place. And yet, once we separated, the other side, the Palestinians were able to build endlessly their capabilities. They were connected also to a small part of Egypt, the Philadelphia corridor, which we are all dealing now with.
Thank God you went into Rafah and didn't follow the instructions of the Americans.
Definitely.
You wouldn't have discovered that.
Definitely. And you saw how inside Gaza, you saw actually two phenomena. The first one was in Oslo. In Oslo, we basically said, we're not going to retreat from the towns. We didn't pull out from Gaza. We didn't give up Philadelphia. We just did one thing. We handed the Palestinians the cities so they can govern their own cities, and we decided not to operate in them at all. This was Palestinian area.
Right.
In 94, Gaza was at the Stone Age, literally. We handed them the cities. It took them 7 years to take Gaza from the Stone Age to rocket shooting. The first rockets were shot on Israel in 2001, and this is prior to the disengagement.
Right.
By 2004, 10 years after Oslo, complete loss of control in the Gaza Strip. When I mean complete loss of control, I mean 10 years before, we could drive with a private car in the middle of Gaza City. 10 years later, you had all brigades, armored brigades, with UAVs, with mortars, with snipers, fighting just at the outskirts of these cities.
Where'd they get that money?
It's all Iranian money and Qatari money. Everything built in the cities and coming from Egypt in tunnels.
Some American money too, I think.
Yeah, probably, yes, because there was a lot of money
From the
going
UNRWA.
to... Definitely. And we lost control of Gaza before the disengagement.
Mm-hmm.
And
I want to ask, because I just want to stop you for a second, because what I've said, and I'm curious if you comment. I don't have a military background, but what I've observed about Gaza today, with the billions of dollars that have been given to them by the Qataris, by the Iranians, by American and Europeans, they created the greatest home court advantage for ground warfare anywhere in the world. It's probably the hardest place in the world to engage in ground warfare because of the tunnel system that they built. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I've said for years that if they dig 1 more meter, it will be like Atlantis. Gaza will disconnect and sink into the sea. They dug everything. Every single house in Gaza goes into tunnels that are all across the Gaza Strip, hundreds and hundreds of miles of tunnels that go all the way to sea level underground, which is very deep.
Yeah.
It cost billions to build something like that. They invested everything in terror infrastructure.
Can you imagine if they would have built a few hotels on the... It could have looked... It's the same Mediterranean as Tel Aviv, right? A couple of $1 billion. They could have had some tourism. It could have been like Singapore, It's
one of the most beautiful areas and beaches along the Mediterranean.
Yeah, faces west. Sunset. Yeah.
Yes, amazing place. But they chose otherwise. And 10 years after Oslo, when we completely lost control, we had to take a decision. The towns were attacked constantly. We couldn't contain this anymore. And you had only 2 choices: or conquer back Gaza,
or walk
away.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and I'm saying that unfortunately, Prime Minister Sharon decided to disengage. At the time, I was aide-de-camp of the Chief of General Staff. And I remember we were sitting in the Chief of Staff's office. Secretary comes in and says, "Open the TV. You need to see this." We opened the TV. And the Chief of Staff hears on TV that the Prime Minister decided to disengage from Gaza. There were no discussions, no assessments, no work around that. It's just the Prime Minister with himself decided he's pulling out, and he announced it. So a week later, we had the cabinet meeting, and I was at the camp. I was sitting in the side. Everybody was sitting around the table, and Sharon slaps the table and says, "I decided to disengage. What's your assessment?" And I'm thinking, I don't know, in the army, we usually assess first and then decide.
Most Most people do that.
Yeah, right? And the chief of staff says to him, Moshe Bogi Elon, says to the Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, listen, if you pull out of Gaza like that, in 1 year, Gaza will become Hamastan, Al-Qaedastan, and Hezbollahstan. This is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And the Prime Minister doesn't say anything. He looks at the head of Shin Bet, Avi Dichter. Says, Avi, what's your assessment? Says exactly what Bogi said. If you connect Gaza to Egypt, endless amount of weapons, know-how, technology are going to pour into Gaza. We're going to lose control. And although this was the Defense Establishment assessment, Prime Minister decided to go forward with his plan. And once we withdrew from Gaza, basically the IDF had no tools to control what will happen there. And anybody who says we can pull out because the IDF is strong doesn't understand that the IDF is strong in context. If you create a reality for the IDF that is not relevant, the IDF becomes not relevant.
Right.
And this is what happened in the last 20 years. The IDF had no capability to stop the buildup of power inside the Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Strip reached a point that Hamas is bigger and stronger of all of ISIS. When people ask, how can it be that it's taking more than 10 months to fight them? Look how much time it took with the ISIS. And ISIS wasn't as strong, wasn't as equipped, didn't have the tunnels infrastructure the way Hamas has. This is why it takes time.
You know who didn't learn that lesson also? When Biden left Afghanistan the same way. Just picked up and left, made a decision, we're leaving. And we're paying the price now in America too, all around the world, because of the incompetence of the withdrawal. And it's a lesson that you would think would be well understood by now, but it's not.
Yeah.
Because the politics, unfortunately, overwhelm the facts on the ground and the realities. And Sharon was all excited in those days because he got a letter from George Bush saying, if you pull out of Gaza, I sort of recognize that you don't have to pull out of all of Yudav Shomron. And Sharon waved it around and said, look, I got us at least parts of Yudav Shomron. And then Hillary Clinton comes in as Secretary of State a year later and rips it up. So it was a failure on all fronts. So that's choice number one. Walk away, and you've convinced me. No, I can't walk away.
Now, we have to remember that in this small, meaningless area of Gaza, we had to operate now with the whole army. The whole army. And this is a very small place. It's not Judea and Samaria. So if, God forbid, we would have done that in Judea and Samaria, even 20 IDF couldn't deal with this. If they had the chance, 20 years, to build infrastructure on these big mountains overlooking all of the coastal area of Israel, there is no way we could win that. I mean, it was game over.
Yeah.
So separation is not an option.
I'm with you 100% so far.
Okay, so what did General Allen and the Obama administration try to do? They knew there is no way that Israel will agree to an idea of separation, complete separation. So they said, okay, we'll bring you another idea. And the idea is military control. They said, understand, look, you are worried about the Jordan Valley. And so, you know what? We'll deploy forces along the Jordan Valley, which will keep the border with Jordan safe. But what they fail to say is that this doesn't give any solution to the everyday operation in the cities. And we saw what happened in Gaza.
Yeah, of course.
In 7 years, complete loss of control. And also that military occupation is always for a short period of time. You cannot keep it endlessly. Now, we've seen that in Iraq with America and Afghanistan, with America and Russia. Mm-hmm. And we operated for a long time with an army in South Lebanon. It's amazing to see. It doesn't matter if it's Iraq, Afghanistan, or Lebanon. It doesn't even matter if it's Americans, Russians, or Israelis. It always ends the same.
Yep.
You will
badly.
retreat. You won't have internal or international legitimacy over time to have an army in a place that doesn't belong to you. And the other problem is that because the roads are not alive, you don't have your own citizens driving them, so the roads are not alive, so all the armies behave the same. They go and build bases, and then when they need to go from point A to point B, they need a convoy. And then they face improvised explosive devices and attacks. I remember the U.S. Dealing with almost 3,000 American soldiers killed just on these convoys in Iraq.
Yeah.
At a certain point, America decided to build a new organization because of the improvised explosive devices problem. An organization they named JIDO, Joint Improvised Explosive Devices Destruction Organization. They gave this organization a budget that is bigger than the ground forces in the IDF. And myself, as a combat engineer, I had a lot of work with this organization. Dealing with these convoys, with roads that are not alive, it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And then this is why you have so many casualties that at the end of the day you retreat.
It is?
So the only viable solution Israel has is having overriding a security responsibility over all of the land of Israel, freedom of operation for the IDF everywhere to foil terror attacks and prevent the buildup of terror entities, armies or terrorists, responsibility over the sky, over the spectrum, over the borders, and then also massive presence of Jews, because what creates security, even before the army, is settling the land.
Yep.
This is what creates security.
And if you're going to, isn't it fair, though, if you're asking Jewish people to settle the land, that it be the land of Israel, that it be land that, Israel asserts its sovereignty over? Because otherwise, the Jewish people that live there, they're playing on different rules. They want to build a house, they have to go to the army. Why should you go to the army to build a house? You don't go to the army to build a house in Tel Aviv, right? So at the end of the day, I agree with you about settling the land, but settling the land without sovereignty is, I don't understand it. Like, how does Israel benefit from withholding sovereignty once it's already exercising military control? Then they're accused of being an occupier. If you don't believe it's your land, you shouldn't be there. If it is your land, exercise the sovereignty, bring in your army. It's your land. You have the right to bring in the army. And then I believe you can, frankly, bring a better and more stable environment, not just to the Jewish people, not just to the state of Israel, but to all the inhabitants. Everyone's better off under those circumstances.
Yeah. So the question is why? Why isn't it? Why isn't this happening?
Yeah.
It's not happening, right?
Yeah. Well, hopefully.
I think that we're facing a reality where the society is divided between two ways of looking at the situation. A big part of the society says we need to put our security and existence as a top priority. We need to be on the mountains. We need to be in the Jordan Valley. We need this to exist. And that's our top priority. And frankly, we don't really have solution. We don't care about the Palestinian issue. We want security and we want to exist. There is another portion of the society that says we don't want to rule somebody else. We want to be a democracy. We don't want apartheid, although I never understood the connection to apartheid. It has nothing to do.
It's a bad analogy.
But people use this this phrase. People are telling us for many, many years, you have only two choices. Either separate, meaning let's create an existential threat for the state of Israel, or annex 2 million Palestinians, and that's it, and then you won't be a Jewish state. So people look at these two options and says, wow, these are terrible options. We don't want this option. We don't want the other one. And then it creates a reality where Israel is stuck. Nothing happens. Because they really believe that that's it. These are the options. And what we say in IDSF is that
IDSF, tell me, just to remind.
Yeah, IDSF is a grassroots movement and a think tank comprised of 35,000 Israeli officers, commanders, operators, and general public. There are thousands of officers.
35,000, you said?
35,000.
It's big.
You remember when you started this position as ambassador, we just created, we were a few hundreds. But now 4 years later, 35,000.
Wow, kol hakavod, you've done amazing. I didn't realize you were that big. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's growing very, very fast. It has a lot of traction in the Israeli society.
Right.
And especially because our organization already 2 years ago wrote a very, very in-depth assessment to the government and the security establishment saying war is imminent. In the coming 2 years, there will be a war and we need to conquer Gaza. And we said it 2 years ago. And now all these videos of us talking about that in the Knesset and in different places are now viral. You know, I said, these guys knew what they were talking about. They saw the strategic shift and the fact that we are going to war. And now
let's go back to how you bridge the choice of annexation or retreat.
Yeah. So I would say this.
My friends, One Jewish State is hot off the presses. Just been published. It is the intellectual foundation for Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. It's a book which makes the case for Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria as being good for Israel, being good for the Palestinians, being good for the region, being good for stability, and I would add, it achieves God's will as set forth in the holy texts. So I hope you'll buy the book. It's available wherever you buy books. Obviously, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can get it at lots of different places. You can just Google it and find it, and they'll ship it to you overnight. And it is One Jewish State, the last best hope for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Enjoy the read.
While our national security needs are very, very rigid, you cannot play around with what I explained before. We need to be on the mountains. We need to be in the Jordan Valley. We need massive presence of Jews in Judea and Samaria, and also in the Negev, in the Galil. It's not just about Judea and Samaria.
Right.
We have challenges also in the Negev and the Galil. Statecraft is almost endlessly flexible. I'll give you an example. How many states you have in Italy, for example?
I don't know.
So in Italy, for example, you have 3 states. You have Italy. You have the Vatican. The Vatican is a state,
Right.
State recognized and part of the UN. The Vatican is a state the size of a neighborhood inside the capital of another state, and it's a state.
Right.
In the northern part of Italy, you have a small city-state called San Marino. Israelis usually hear about San Marino when there is Eurovision or football. San Marino is completely surrounded by Italy. And I visit a lot Rome, the parliament. I speak Italian, so I speak in the parliament. Last time I went to Rome, I asked one of the parliament members, if I come from San Marino and I want Italian citizenship, what do I need to do? He looked at me amazed. He said, what do you mean? It's like you, Amir Avivi, asking for citizenship. It's exactly the same.
Right.
Although San Marino is surrounded 360 degrees by Italy. And now when you arrive to the border of Italy in the north, it borders with Switzerland. And then you cross into Switzerland and you drive something like 9 miles inside Switzerland. You arrive to an Italian canton. These are Italians that vote in Italy, not in Switzerland.
Right.
So sometimes when I give these examples, people say to me, oh, come on, Amir, we're talking about Europe here. We're in the Middle East. We're dealing with Muslims, with radicals, with Arabs,
Right.
Why give these examples? And I want to remind that there is no continent on this globe where blood was spilled more and there were more wars than Europe.
Of course.
Everything that was created in Europe was created in wars, in really fierce wars. And through these wars, Europe was divided the way it is. So we in IDSF, we said, you know what? Let's go in depth and really see all the different possibilities. of what could be a solution, that it's not a fully sovereign state and we don't need to retreat and we don't need to separate. We went to the State Department and we searched 66 different territories and states, all of them formally recognized by the U.S. as completely independent entities, all of them with diminished sovereignty. So you use, Ambassador, the example of Puerto Rico, an American example, but you have also a Dutch model, you have also a British model, and you have also Arab models that are relevant. And I'll give an example of an Arab model. Gaza, we know it's a big problem, but I look at Gaza also as a big opportunity. Why? Everybody is talking now about the day after Hamas. What will happen in Gaza the day after Hamas? And the government of Israel is saying, and it's saying that with massive, massive support from the Israeli society, the day after Hamas, there will be no Hamas, no Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but also not the Palestinian Authority. Israel is saying there is no way we are going to let the Palestinian Authority govern in Gaza.
Right.
Okay. No Hamas, no Palestinian Islamic Jihad, no Palestinian Authority. What's the solution? And for the first time, the government needs to think out of the box and bring new solutions. So they're using now one of the solutions we in IDSF wrote, and it's also mentioned in my book. The solution is similar to what we see in the United Emirates, meaning city-states. Singapore is also a city-state, by the way.
Right.
City-states that are run by local clans. All the cities, in the Arab society are run by clans.
Right.
Even in Judea and Samaria, the Palestinian cities, Ramallah, Nablus, Hebron, are all run by clans. Some of them you know. You know part of the clans of Hebron, for example, Jabri family.
I know them well. Yep.
Yeah. Even Israeli Arab cities are run by clans.
Sure.
And I can tell you that in the first meeting we in IDSF had with Prime Minister Netanyahu 3 years ago, while he was contemplating applying sovereignty, we had a long meeting, and at a certain stage, he asked us, we were 6 generals in the room, what will happen if I apply sovereignty and the Palestinian Authority collapses? And really, he asked it seriously. He didn't know the answer. So Major General Jerry Gershon was sitting there, and he looked at the Prime Minister and said, but Mr. Prime Minister, this is not a theoretical question. It happened. Jerry commanded Operation Defensive Shield. And in Operation Defensive Shield, the Palestinian Authority completely collapsed. Arafat remained in a room in the Mukata.
Right.
And there was no Palestinian Authority.
Right.
And Jerry said, we continue to work with the municipalities of the cities, everyday work, like nothing happened. And then there was Brigadier General Ariel Sharon. He jumped and said, yes, I was the brigade commander of Nablus, of Shrem, and I worked for 2 years with the municipality of Shrem. By the way, while Israeli tanks and APCs are operating in the city.
Right.
But they continue to manage everyday life in the cities, like nothing happened. Now, we're in an historical moment where Israel is saying, on one hand, we have had it with the Palestinian Authority, and when Israel says they're not willing to have them in Gaza, the next question would be, okay, so why are you willing to have them in Judea and Samaria? Does it make sense? If they're corrupt, if they pay terrorists, if they incite, why do you agree to have them in Judea and Samaria? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
If you say you are not willing to have them in Gaza. But also looking at the Palestinian society, 95% of the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria say, we don't want the Palestinian...
They're corrupt. They're completely corrupt, and they do nothing for the people. If you're inside the Mahmoud Abbas inner circle, you do fine. Otherwise, they're but it's not surprising. I mean, these are, and I point this out in my book. Palestinians have never had a country. They've never really engaged seriously in self-governance. Before Israel was formed in 1948, there was 50 years of deep thought. What should we look like? What's the model European Parliament, American democracy? What will the banking system look like? How do we run the economy? I mean, there was a real effort to construct the institutions for self-governance. That's not the way they're thinking about it. They're thinking about it, give us power, send us money, we'll put it in our pockets, we'll give it out as little as we have to keep people from killing each other, and that's it. That's the government.
Right.
And that's their, you point out, look, there has never been a real Palestinian nation or even a movement. I mean, it's not like, Jewish people for 3,000 years yearned to, 2,000 years from the Churban Bayit Sheni, they yearned to be returned to Jerusalem. There's no yearning to be at a particular place. And as you say, they're clannish and there's no cohesion, but mostly there's massive corruption. And so, yeah, I mean, I've observed the same thing. I'll tell you what, when I was the ambassador, we were thinking about this and we decided to do a little test case. So we know that Yvette Lieberman did this in the early 2000s, but we went back, we spoke to some people, and up in the triangle, like Faham and those, Baka al-Gharbiya, those Arab neighborhoods, we said, guys, you're 100% Arab. Do you want to live in a Jewish state? Or, right now we're rethinking everything. We could take the Green Line and we could redraw it, and you'll be on the other side of the Green Line. And then if there's a Palestinian state, you'll be with your, is that going to make you happy? No.
Of course not.
Of course not. Don't ever say that again. So, yeah.
Have you ever heard
Yeah.
about an Israeli Arab that once we established the Palestinian Authority, emigrated to the Palestinian Authority?
It's unthinkable. And of course, that'll never happen.
Never happened.
But that's also part of the, there's a point there, though, which I think is important, that I don't think Israel takes enough credit for and makes the point enough about. Israel, in this very dangerous area, has really empowered its Arab citizens. They've really reached the pinnacle of business, of law, of medicine, of science, of academia, more than proportional representation in all the elite universities. They dominate the pharmacy industry. I mean, I have a dear friend one of the highest ranking business leaders in the country, who's an Arab Muslim. Israel really has you compare that, to when Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese, right? Thousands of miles off the shore of California. And what did the Americans do? I mean, my country, and it's an embarrassment, but what did we do? Anybody that looked Japanese said, out of your home, but they put them in internment camps until the end of World War II, right? Very dark stain on America. But they were afraid. Americans were afraid, from this attack, and that's how they reacted.
And while we are in a war now, what does Israel do? Send and risk the soldiers to release a Bedouin
today,
who has been kept today as a hostage inside a tunnel, and Israeli soldiers went and risked their lives in one of the most impressive and complicated operations the IDF ever did.
Right.
To release
this was a few hours ago.
Bedouin and bring him back home because he's an Israeli citizen, that we take care for every single citizen of Israel.
It doesn't get out. It's given Israel's been at war with at least two Arab countries, right? Lebanon and Syria and Iraq since 1948. It hasn't had a day of peace. And it has 20% of its population is Arab. And if they reacted to this fear like the Americans, they wouldn't let them out of their towns, and yet they're integrated in society. The ones that I know are, they're actually, many of them are patriotic. Some of my friends have kids in the most elite intelligence units, 8200. Others, I mean, it's so different than people understand it to be. And that template, of empowering Arab society who want to live in peace with Israel, can be exported into Judea and Samaria. I mean, if we are given the opportunity to control it and to keep it peaceful. And I want to tell you something, because it's you'll find this interesting, but not surprising. I used to go once a month to meet with the Shabak, when I was ambassador, and so I would meet with the head. I don't need to mention his name, but you know who he is. And I met with him, And we talk about different things. And he said to me, I would say to him, what's the greatest threat right now facing Israel? He said, the greatest threat facing Israel is that it will have sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. I said, why? He says, because we can't do it, we can't absorb it, we can't deal with it. It'll be the worst thing to the Jewish people, and we won't be a Jewish state anymore. I said, well, now you're assuming how the voting works, and he says, we don't want to be in Jenin, and we don't want to be in Tulkarm. And I said, aren't you already in Jenin and Tulkarm? I mean, isn't that what you do isn't that what your elite, units do? They go into Jenin and Tulkarm and other places, and they keep. You have to be there. Even you who don't want to be there are there. You're there all the time. So what does it mean I don't want to be there? I mean, you're there anyway. Why don't you be there and act like a country and establish the institutions that will bring some stability?
But the issue is that, again, it doesn't realize that even if you bring 3-4 million Jews to Area C in Judea and Samaria, you can still create self-governance in the cities. There are so many models. And what I like about about clans, they're not necessarily good people. We know who we're dealing with. But clans are families, they're tribes. And the head of the family wants all the people in the family to be loyal to him. And what endangers loyalty in a clan is religious radicalism or nationalism. And that's why clans tend to suppress this tendency. This is why in the Emirates, if anybody has an idea to be extreme, that's it, gone. And this is why everybody feels very comfortable to come to the Emirates, So I think that once you will take out the elements that are radicalizing the society, that are educating people to hate Jews and Israel, that are paying billions to terrorists, and that have one goal, to destroy Israel. Once you take out these elements that are Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Palestinian Authority, and deal with the clans, then there will be a future. And if you bring millions of Jews to Judea and Samaria, just thinking about the industries, the economy, the chance of Palestinians to work, as they do today in industrial areas in Judea and Samaria, earning 3 times more than what they would earn inside Ramallah or Jenin, this will bring prosperity. And this will bring an interest to coexist and live together. Now, I'm not saying everything will be perfect, but we certainly are not going to face the harsh reality we have had since Oslo, because I can definitely say that before Oslo, the life of Palestinians was much, much better. And since Oslo, they are miserable. What Hamas is doing to them and Palestinian Authority is destroying their lives. And I think they can have a much better life.
It's based on, again, Oslo was this whole faulty premise that Jews and Arabs can't live together, when we know that they can live together. They lived together in Israel since 1948 and live well together. So, look, I think it matters less. Like you say, the statecraft matters less. You could have, city-states. You could have cantons. You could call them emirates.
You can have a San Marino.
You could call them clan. You could call, or you could have, an Israeli sovereignty umbrella but limited with local governance. Limited with local governance. It's all the same. It's all different sides of the same coin. The key point, I think, 2 key points. Number one, Israel must maintain, deep, control, and from a security perspective, we're talking now. Biblical perspective, it's everything. It's different. But I'm just talking from a security perspective. Israel, the IDF must be in Judea and Samaria, just as it's in Netanya or just as it's in Beersheba. Same thing, right? That's number one. Number two, with regard to, we have to marry, what I say in the book, we have to marry 2 concepts that are already in place in the Israeli basic laws. First basic law is human dignity. Anybody that Israel is responsible for is entitled to human dignity. They're entitled to not be oppressed, not to be certain rights. At the same time, that can't come at the expense of Israel being the nation state of the Jewish people. So you have 2 laws already. It's already there. And again, the statecraft of it, is less significant than the concept. Those, I think,
and it's flexible. So many solutions.
There are. I mean, as you say, I point to Puerto Rico because I'm an American and because nobody ever accused America of being an apartheid state, even though.
So we can go in depth, to a whole convention just talking about 66 different entities that the U.S. recognizes as completely.
There's lots of ways to skin this cat.
Independent.
But the concept is important. People have to rally around this concept. It is. I mean, to me, but more importantly, it sounds like to you, this is the future of Israel's security, and there's no substitute for it.
Yes, and we must really deal seriously with the biggest question of all: what is needed to secure Israel for generations to come? We cannot endanger this country. We have been expelled from our land 4 times: Assyrians, Babylonians, Romans, and Muslims. We won't get another chance. We need to make sure that this time it's forever.
Do you think that October 7th was a wake-up call for that?
A big wake-up call. 2 years ago when we prepared this assessment, we put a picture of a frog being boiled.
Yeah.
A can.
Right.
And we said, this is Israel. Israel is being boiled, and if things will continue the way they are, maybe in 10, 20 years, Israel will face a real existential threat. On the 7th of October, as terrible and devastating this day was, the frog jumped out of the can, and now it's outside. And what we need to make sure it never goes back again.
That's a great analogy. Wow, really a great analogy. I think everybody can understand that. But a frog out of a boiling pot is better off than being in the boiling pot. But it's not out of the woods. It's still a frog, and it still has to find a home and be secure. Well, listen, your insights are really so important, and I really appreciate it. I feel like we're getting this from like a real expert, and so I'm grateful that you took some time with me.
Thank you very much.
And I hope we'll work together on some matters that we're both interested in, and you should have great success. And it's amazing that you've grown this organization. I remember, just before we break, that there was this group of a few, maybe 100 or so generals who were very left, had a very different view of yours, and we were all grateful that an equal number of generals came up to kind of with a much more sensible approach. But it seems to me that since then the people have voted with their feet, and it sounds like a massive amount of Israeli security experts and soldiers who really understand have seen it your way, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think that the officers of Israel are a reflection of the Israeli society, and the Israeli society is resolute, strong, Zionist, connected to reality. They didn't have a voice, so now they do.
Thanks to you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Amir.
A pleasure.
Pleasure. My friends, One Jewish State is hot off the presses. Just been published. It is the intellectual foundation for Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. It's a book which makes the case for Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria as being good for Israel, being good for the Palestinians, being good for the region, being good for stability, and I would add, it achieves God's will as set forth in the holy texts. So I hope you'll buy the book. It's available wherever you buy books. Obviously, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can get it at lots of different places. You can just Google it and find it, and they'll ship it to you overnight. And it is One Jewish State, the last best hope for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Enjoy the read.